Welcome back to The Daily Show. My guests tonight are journalists and co-authors of the new book, Abundance. Please welcome New York Times opinion columnist Ezra Klein and staff writer for The Atlantic, Derek Thompson. Gentlemen, you wrote a book about an optimistic future, about reforming America's institutions. Why delve into sci-fi?
It's a good, deep question. Yeah, there's a sentence in the first chapter of the book that sounds like one of the most obvious sentences ever written in any nonfiction book ever. We say, quote, "To have the future that we want, America needs to build and invent more of what we need." Like, how in the world do you have to write an entire book about the most obvious sentence you've ever heard?
So you cribbed that sentence, is what you said.
Yes, absolutely.
You stole it, you put it there.
ChatGPT wrote that sentence.
Yes, it's
so easy now.
And a lot of the book.
Yeah. And the thing is, you wouldn't have to write a whole book about that sentence if you lived in a world of sanity. But we don't. We live in a world of the constitutional crises that you talked about. And we also live in a world that has affordability crises and housing crises. And a lot of these crises, unfortunately, are worst in blue states and blue cities. And so what our book is trying to do is to redefine liberalism, the Democratic Party, for an age where the Democratic Party is incredibly unpopular, but it has to be strong and popular to take on Donald Trump. But I think we have to take a good long look in the mirror and say, why is it that we've allowed the places we have the most power to become so problematic that people are leaving and we're losing power in these places?
Yeah, now the book is essentially, it's written to the left as sort of a credo as to what we should be looking forward to. What is this idea of abundance? In a nutshell, what are we talking about?
So for a long time, the left has looked for what it could subsidize, right? If we don't have enough health care insurance, can we give you a health care voucher? That's Obamacare. Can we give you food stamps to get food, Pell Grants to get higher education, rental vouchers to get housing? Then you look at places where liberals govern, and a lot of it doesn't work because we don't have enough of the core thing. If you give people a bunch of rental vouchers in New York City, in San Francisco, what often happens is they can't get housing because there isn't enough of it or the price goes up. Higher education is a similar dynamic. Healthcare has some dynamics like that. You got to, at a certain point, focus on building enough of the things you need. Housing is a big one. I'm from California. I'm from Irvine, California, down south from Los Angeles. I lived in San Francisco during much of the writing of the book. This is a solved problem. We know how to build apartment buildings.
Yeah.
We know how to build homes. We just don't let people do it. And the result is that California, New York, Illinois are losing hundreds of thousands of people a year. So many that by 2030, after the census, where we reapportion political power based on population, after that, if all goes as it's been going, a Democrat who won every state Kamala Harris won, and also won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, still wouldn't win the presidency because blue states would have lost so much power by driving out working class families to red states. So yeah, you got to fix this stuff.
Yeah. And maybe I want to tweak that optimistic look at the future. But you speak about this. You talk a lot about the regulations in places like California and places like New York. Is the answer to make California look more like Texas? Is that what we're talking about?
Sometimes I think absolutely the answer is to make California look more like Texas. I mean, sometimes if the problem is that a city has too many regulations and too much zoning and too many rules that get in the way of accessing the most basic technology of putting up sticks and adding an elevator, then yeah, you take away the bad rules that are getting in the way of adding housing supply where you have to just add more damn houses. It doesn't mean, though, that we're Texas Republicans. And I think it's important to say that neither is Donald Trump in a weird way. Like, Trump was elected because of an affordability crisis in this country. He was elected because of inflation. And the biggest part of inflation, the biggest part of anybody's budget, is housing. Trump could have been elected and said, I'm a Texas Republican, and my first order of business is going to be to make it easier to build houses in America. What does he do instead? He slaps a tariff on lumber from Canada and drywall material from Mexico. Guess what's really, really hard to build if you have no wood and you also have no drywall material? It turns out to be houses. So the first thing he does is make it harder to build the thing we need to solve the affordability crisis. Donald Trump does not understand how to fix the problems that ironically led to his election. That's where Democrats need to stand up and say, we're going to build an opposition movement that fixes people's problems by understanding people's problems.
Now, how much is it? Sure. You're building an argument for building, for coming together. Obviously, you're writing this book before this past election. And there's times where I'm hearing about this vision of if we can get people together to get on the same page, we can fix big issues like the housing crisis, like the environment. It feels like we're talking about like we can make this Titanic run beautifully. But then the election hits and we hit the iceberg. So how much of this is still applicable to a democratic movement that feels very hobbled right now?
I got to say, man, the thing that surprised me least in the election was the blue shift to Trump.
Yeah.
Right? That blue cities and blue states had the biggest shift to the right. Because this was an affordability election. And we're actually, I think, just generally in a new age in American politics. For a very long time after the financial crisis, the problem the economy had was demand. We didn't have enough demand. We didn't have enough jobs. We didn't have high enough wages. And everybody on both sides talked endlessly about demand. And in the background, for a long time, for decades, there had been this building affordability crisis in healthcare, in housing, in education, in childcare, in elder care. And nobody was really doing anything about it. And then the pandemic hit, and inflation hit, and the entire, like, Sauron's eye of American politics moved to prices. And inflation calmed in parts, right? It's not going up the way it was, although we'll see how the tariffs go. But the affordability crisis then was in full view, and it got worse, and it got worse. And so we're in this era where people are going to have to figure out how to solve this. And yeah, this was a bad election. Like, we're in a bad place. Everything I was like having trouble deciding during your monologue, should I laugh? Right?
Yes.
Like, this stuff
This is Ezra. This is the problem with liberals today. They're watching a comedy show being like, should I laugh? Should I think about it? How do I feel? Let me run some focus groups. What do you feel, Ezra?
I have felt like disgusted these last weeks. Like, this has been the worst time I can remember in American politics. And the problem that liberals keep running into is they keep trying to beat Donald Trump, not based on what he does to people's lives, but what he does to people's institutions. And if the Democratic Party is going to win, if it's going to beat the populist right, which is coming up again and again, not just here, but in other countries, you have to have answers to the problems people face in their lives, not answers to the abstract questions of politics, not answers to who is on the side of democracy, but answers to whose states are better governed. Which places do you want to live? Who has something to say about what is making your Tuesday hard?
Now, it's interesting you talk about messaging. I get to the end of the book and you bring up Operation Warp Speed, and I'm like, oh, I forgot about Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah, so did everybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Operation Warp Speed is, like, you have a program that, by some accounts, saved 10 to 20 million lives around the world by inventing and accelerating the distribution of mRNA vaccines, and yet nobody talks about it.
Nobody talks about it.
I think the Democrats don't talk about it because it's kind of awkward to give credit to a program that was initiated under Donald Trump. But the weirdest thing of all is that Donald Trump doesn't talk about it. In fact, he's one of the biggest skeptics of mRNA science right now. So it really is bizarre. Like, imagine if we landed a man on the moon and nobody talked about the Apollo program because it just wasn't something that either party could bring up. We saved even more lives with Operation Warp Speed than we saved with the Apollo program, and no one talks about it. I think it's important to take really, really clear lessons from what Operation Warp Speed did. We set a very clear goal. We said in 10 months, we're going to develop a therapy that saves people's lives. We're going to get it to everybody if they want it. And we're going to make the cost of this world-saving therapeutic, maybe the best medicine in the world, $0.00. We set a goal. We identified what the bottlenecks were going to be. We took away the bottlenecks that existed, and we met the goal. Frankly, that's how government should work more often. We should have mayors and governors saying, mayors and governors saying, we're going to set a goal for housing supply. I want to add 100,000 units, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me no. I care about climate change, so I'm going to add this amount of energy that we're going to create from solar and wind and geothermal, and I'm not going to let anybody tell me no. But for some reason, outside of a crisis, we don't have this kind of outcome-oriented politics. This book is about putting outcomes over processes. It's about setting a North Star with a big, bold, beautiful sci-fi vision in the first 3 pages of the book and saying, we can do this, but in order to do it, we have to get out of our own way.
But you're talking about long-term visions. You mentioned having this lens of abundance. It's sort of what you're proposing here. But I think you go out and you talk to people, and we are the politics of short-term results. Everything is about what can you get me now. We're not even thinking about the giant medical miracle of Operation Warp Speed from a few years ago. Like, how does something like this resonate with folks who are on their phones, they're flipping through, they want an answer right now, they want to be angry right now, they want action right now. How do you speak to a grander idea when it feels like the world is moving faster than that?
I'm so glad you asked. So you don't get long-term results in politics without short-term results. And this is a thing I think Democrats have really forgotten. We've been doing high-speed rail in California for a long time. Nobody's winning any elections on that. Under Joe Biden, they passed $42 billion for rural broadband. It passed in, I think, 2021, early 2022. By the end of 2024, you know how many people were hooked up to rural broadband? A couple dozen. We passed $7.5 billion for electric vehicle chargers to build a nationwide EV charger network. We built a couple dozen by the end of his presidency. You cannot win elections if you are passing billions of dollars that people cannot feel within 2 or 3 or 4 years. And that does not have to happen. In the time that California has not built 500 miles of high-speed rail, China built 23,000 miles of high-speed rail. We can do this. Making sure that money through government flows faster is how you make sure that people know government actually matters in their lives. When it goes too slowly, they don't know. And then somebody comes out and says, oh, vote for me. I'm the strong man. I alone can fix it. I will make it work. And then you run the risk that they're going to believe him.
Now, in looking at the Democratic field right now, Democrats, I think, are hearing this message, and then they're saying, maybe we should go on more podcasts. Feels like they're taking baby steps to this. Who is carrying this message? Who do you see as somebody, we come out here and we talk to audiences in between acts, and more often than not, they're desperate for an answer, whether that looks like resistance or whether that looks like a vision of the future that they can get behind. And we're desperately missing some of those voices out there. Do you see this message being carried by anybody articulately?
I see people in Congress and the Senate and governors explicitly picking up this message. I mean, someone asked, a colleague of Ezra Klein at the New York Times asked, where's the Democrats' Project 2025? And Richie Torres, Representative Richie Torres from New York, just tweeted a photo of the cover of this book and without any words, just said, this is my idea of Project 2025 for the Democratic Party.
Feels lazy. That feels lazy on their part.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Oh, there you go. Just to take a picture of War and Peace. The second part. We'll just do the second part.
We're happy to do the work of writing the book if people are going to be taking up the ideas. But people really are taking up the ideas, and that's cool. But I want to say one other thing. You know, you talked about what's the value of a positive vision. And I think it's a fair question. Politics is incredibly negative right now. But I really do think that there's a lot of voters that are starving for not just a negative identity for their party, but a positive identity, right? It's easy for Democrats to say right now why Donald Trump sucks. You can do that over and over and over again. You could do 10 hours of the constitutional crises that he's starting.
You could make a television show about that.
You can make a weekly nightly television show about it. What's the positive vision? All right, Donald Trump sucks. What are we going to place him with? What problems are we going to solve if we have power? The problem right now is that a lot of Democrats who actually have power in blue cities and blue states aren't doing anything with that power in terms of adding housing and clean energy. We want them to show Americans, what will we do if we win? If we can't show Americans the positive vision, if we can't show Americans what happens if we win, do we even deserve to?
Well, it's a fascinating read. Abundance is available now, and also check out the Ezra Klein Show and Derek's Plain English podcast. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. We'll take a quick break. Right back after this.